how do we get out of that linear into a circular system where materials are really valued and there are mechanisms to make sure that we use things over and over and over again.
Welcome to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers Podcast. Each episode will bring you conversations from business leaders and up-and-coming stars in the commercial real estate industry in Canada. Our guests will share their unique career journeys, passions, and advice on what it takes to be successful in this industry. This podcast is brought to you by Highview Partners, connecting people who perform in Canadian real estate.
I am your host, James Ashley, and today I will be connecting you with Philippe Bernier. Philippe currently serves as Vice President of Strategy, Operations and Sustainability at JLL Canada. He plays a pivotal role in advancing their strategy, ensuring operational effectiveness, and accelerating the company's market growth. Before joining the real estate industry, Philippe spent over a decade in management consulting and manufacturing roles. He holds a bachelor degree in civil engineering from Queen's University and a Master of Philosophy in Engineering for Sustainable Development from the University of Cambridge. He is also a licensed professional engineer, lead accredited professional, and he is trained in Lean Six Sigma. With over 20 years of experience alongside numerous contributions, publications, and speaking engagements, Philippe is considered to be one of Canada's leading real estate innovators. A very warm welcome, Philippe, to the People Who Perform podcast. I am delighted to have you here with us today. Now, this is the first conversation where we're going to be delving into the world of innovation and sustainability. And I personally could not think of a more well-rounded and diversified leader to have this conversation with today. So thank you so much for joining us.
James, it's a pleasure to be here with you and all today's listeners. Excited to get into this conversation.
Excellent. Now, we're going to start with looking at the principles that underpin this area of expertise. Now, I myself have discovered when recruiting for ESG, environmental, social and governance, and sustainability professionals, there are many components to consider when building and executing a robust strategy. And we're going to touch upon some of those today, but let's start by getting back to the basics and let's break this down into two parts, Philippe. Firstly, what is energy and carbon, and what is sustainability?
Energy, carbon, and sustainability. 1, 2, 3. So let's start with energy. Energy defined is quite simply the capacity for doing work. As people, we need energy in the terms of food to do the work that we do. And particularly, especially since the Industrial Revolution, that's where we've begun to harness energy to do more work for us. Within energy, there are many different sources of energy that we lean on. Wood, natural gas, oil, nuclear, most recently a lot of solar and wind. We convert these different sources of energy into some different usable forms like electricity to eventually meet needs that we have as people or organizations or society, to light buildings, to power our computer that we're speaking on today, heat, cool, move ourselves and goods. Energy is foundational to the way the world works. And if you want to learn more, I just offer the readers a few quick ideas. Student Energy, if you were to search this, they have a phenomenal energy systems map where you can dive into all sorts of neat information just to understand, like, what is this renewable energy thing? It's brilliant. If you want to go a bit deeper, I'd strongly urge readers, if they've not discovered this, the late Cambridge physics professor David Mackay's Sustainable Energy Without the Hot Air. It's a decade old. You can read it for free. Do not think free means bad or anything. It's phenomenal what David wrote a decade ago. Or if you really want to go deep, check out anything written by Vaclav Smil, who's a prof at University of Manitoba. Vaclav is world class. So that's energy. When we burn fossil fuels, wood, natural gas, or oil, it creates carbon or carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is one of several kind of key greenhouse gases which basically form a quilt around the Earth. It traps heat that would have radiated out back into space. And this is ultimately a good thing, because if we didn't have a greenhouse effect, the Earth would be almost 30 degrees cooler than it is today. It would be a sub-zero ice planet. So greenhouse gases are good in the right balance. The main source of CO2 comes from burning fossil fuels. And that is why energy and carbon, they're really similar, but they're a bit different in that some energy sources generate emissions and some don't. Everything's got an emission somewhere because you need to make, for example, the solar panels. It's not all simple. Then what is sustainability? I'd offer from the investor standpoint, and this has been, James, the past 10 years or so especially, the investor universe defines sustainability as, shall we say, the world-class pursuit of environmental, social, and governance performance, ESG. I like to think of sustainability economically as living off the interest, not the principal, environmentally using resources and creating waste at a rate that can be absorbed by nature. And socially, perhaps it might be the Canadian peace, order, and good government, or the US life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. There needs to be some social construct in which we work that supports everyone to achieve some personal means while not impinging upon those of the rest of society, so we can ideally have safe, long, and healthy lives.
Excellent. Very interesting. Thanks for the insight there. And moving on from the basics and now looking a bit closer at energy and sustainability on a global scale, what is going on with climate change across the world in 2021?
The focus on climate and climate change continues to accelerate. It was starting before the pandemic, among other reasons, because of efforts, teenage Swedish activists, and others. There's been a lot of work working for years, but 2020 seemed to be a tipping point, and it's continuing into 2021. I think some of the main changes that I see right now, explosion of corporate commitments to decarbonize their operations and supply chains by various different dates. There is a challenge of bridging the commitment to action, but it's unbelievable if you were to search the RE100 pledges or net zero pledges. It's just been going up by hundreds of percent every year. So there is strong corporate and organizational commitment. We see enormous interest in funding carbon transitions from the Biden administration now that they are in the White House. And we also recently have seen the EU Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, which is imposing upon European pensioned investors, regardless of where in the world in which they invest, that they must disclose the degree to which those investments are, shall we say, green. So there's a proliferation of voluntary and regulatory commitments, as well as fiscal stimulus that is aimed at greening different operations.
Now, moving this conversation into real estate, Philippe, why do buildings matter and why should we care about environmental performance of buildings?
One of the reasons why I chose over a decade ago to focus my career on improving the performance of buildings is because buildings matter. We can't deliver the improved outcomes environmentally or socially or economically if we don't address the built environment. I am, James, as you know, a civil engineer by training. And if we look around us, we're all in buildings, presumably right now, or we're driving between buildings as we're going from A to B in our car. But it's all about the built environment. And if we were to add up all the direct and indirect supply chain emissions from buildings, about 40% of global emissions, just when we're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, come from buildings. So we've got to solve buildings if we're going to solve other things. And conveniently, buildings have one of the most aligned value propositions of any industry sector, whereby investments in energy efficiency and decarbonization done correctly are accretive. And they might not, depending on what you do, pay back tomorrow, but many of these things are way, 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 way better than the 0.1% return we get on our bank interest accounts. So there's a strong alignment economically with also doing things that improve resilience and reduce cost and make for better buildings for people and planet.
Now, do buildings contribute to social performance, in your opinion?
There's growing awareness of the importance of buildings on our individual health, well-being, sense of productivity and others. So the interest in improving buildings, it's not just coming from investors, it's coming from employees and organizations who realize that space matters. Recent research out of Harvard Medical School, I think it's the Chan School, confirms that if you or I are doing more demanding cognitive work, let's say the strategic thinking, crisis communication response, analytical work, we see if you just have better air quality in your room, good fresh air, you are from 1 to 300% generally more effective at completing those tasks than if you had inferior air quality. So what we're seeing is variously like access to natural light, good noise, thermal comfort, fresh air really affect us personally, as do the ability to have views of nature or having plants in your space. It's strange, but true. We evolved as people, as a species, from the environment, and we like natural things. So to the extent we can maintain a healthy balance in our space, 9 out of 10 breaths, James, that we take during our life are taken indoors now. It really matters. And some of the challenges are we can't see, for example, what we're breathing because it's molecular level and our senses aren't evolved to see the quality of the air. It really matters. And that's where a lot of research is galvanizing around how we can create better, healthier places for people.
I think from what you've shared, we can all listen in and understand why we should be focusing our attention towards the environmental performance of our physical assets. I guess the next question is, how do we go about measuring the impact?
It's a lot easier now in 2021 than it might have been 5 or 10 or 15 years ago. Globally, there is general agreement that the way in which we measure the environmental, social, and governance, or shall we say sustainability performance of real estate portfolios, is through the annual GRESB real estate assessment, the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark. It addresses, at this point, approximately 100,000 assets in well over 100 countries, valued at trillions of dollars. It's some might estimate that 1 in 4 commercial buildings now respond to this voluntary initiative. It gives an ESG score that helps a respondent who might, let's say, own a portfolio of whether it's 5, 10, or $20 billion worth of office buildings, shopping centers, industrial facilities, multifamily. It gives you a score to understand where you're doing well, where you might have opportunities to improve, and it's an annual response. So it's promoting continuous improvement, and the survey changes as the industry gets better and better. But GRESB is helping to organize the institutional money, which really drives a lot of performance in our built environment. That's at the portfolio level. At the building level, there are many, many voluntary certifications that can be pursued. In Canada, commonly BOMA Best and LEED. Over in Europe, we might have BREEAM, Australia Green Star. There are certifications now for health and well-being through Fitwel and the Well Building Standard. Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certification. 1 in 5 Canadians have a mobility, visual, and hearing impairment. And there are ways in which you can align with emerging best practices designed by people in the community to promote access and more economic opportunity. There's a lot of great voluntary ways of measuring the different facets of sustainability at the building level. And then if we were to get, James, into where the regulations are at, certainly in Canada, we're seeing more and more interest in mandating the disclosure of energy, carbon, and water consumption or emissions. And this is where a lot of the voluntary rating systems somewhat set the direction, and in due course, regulations follow to try to deal with market transformation. In my opinion, energy and carbon emissions in a building is absolutely material to transactions when we're renting or buying. You want to know what you're signing on for because it's a good indication of cost and in some cases risk.
Yeah, certainly many different layers and levels of measurement taking place here. It's a very complex subject matter. Now, if we were to shine that spotlight on Canadian real estate, how does Canada measure up on a global scale in terms of real estate?
We mentioned a moment ago GRESB. If we were to look at the GRESB results for North America and zoom in on Canada as a subset of responses to this international benchmark for real estate sustainability, Canada measures and has for years very closely against Australia. Interestingly, the other international leader who's been being affected by climate change longer than many other jurisdictions. The Aussies have done phenomenal work to improve the quality of their built environment. So it's certainly encouraging that Canada in many ways is measuring up on a voluntary basis, similarly to the Australians. We're not absolutely the best. We're doing very well. One example of recent international leadership from Canada and the Canada Green Building Council created the first zero carbon building standard, which is now on its second version. And there's more and more registrations and pursuits of certification under this zero carbon building rating system. I certainly see lots of voluntary leadership from many actors in the built environment sector, not just from supply chain players like global engineering behemoth WSP Group and others, also the big institutional owners, just top of mind like Bentel, Green Oak, Cadillac, Fairview, Oxford, Quadreal, Triobus. There's many firms and beyond who've done great work. On the good, I'd say, James, also we are doing some really good work in Canada in terms of research into resilience. Intact Center on Climate Adaptation is being set up in concert with the University of Waterloo, trying to figure out ways to help our communities be more resilient to flooding events. And Canada is also beginning to see some glimpses of leadership in cross-laminated timber. This is probably the most important change in civil structural engineering materials in almost 150 years, where we can now build strong, safe, tall wood structures, which is really important because a big chunk of a building's life cycle carbon emissions come from the use of concrete. And we're now proving that we can build the same quality buildings in wood, and wood actually sequesters, it basically parks carbon in the wood. So these are some good things. Where might we have opportunities for improvement in Canada? If we measure up internationally, we have opportunities to improve our building codes, make them more demanding, both for new and renovations. I live in Quebec, and I'm still seeing houses going in with natural gas, and I scratch my head because Quebec's got one of the greenest grids on the planet. Why are we putting gas in new homes? It doesn't make sense. I think we also have a gap that I observed to help our colleagues in the appraisal community and even in the mortgage lending community to better assess the value of higher performance buildings, both in terms of reduced operating costs and also in terms of reduced risk. I see some challenges in the appraisal and lending community that don't properly incent or disincent different forms of construction. And I think we've got some room to improve in those communities.
Are you looking for a specialized recruiting partner to connect you with the people who perform in commercial real estate? At Highview, we partner with some of Canada's leading real estate companies. From national landlords, institutional investors, REITs and service providers, to local developers, third parties, and private family businesses. We are passionate about the Canadian real estate industry and enjoy discussing what's happening in the market. We also provide insight and advice on hiring trends, compensation benchmarking, career roadmaps, networking opportunities, and much more. Visit us at highviewpartners.ca or contact us directly to discover how we can connect you to people who perform.
Switching gears and stepping into your shoes, let's talk more about your career path from the oil and gas pipelines to manufacturing, now more recently real estate. Why did you choose a career in sustainability, Philippe?
Growing up in the 80s and 90s, sustainability wasn't really a topic that, as a word, if memory serves correct, it only really came into its modern use in the late 80s. That said, growing up around the table, my father was one of the heads of the Canadian Environmental Assessment Agency. So dinner table conversations would often circulate around some of the tensions that existed environmentally and socially with different major projects, whether it's an offshore oil rig in Newfoundland or a new dam project or mining sites, et cetera. Things that would trigger the federal environmental assessment legislation. So I grew up, interestingly, learning about the concept of the triple bottom line, not realizing that that's what I was learning. I chose civil environmental engineering. It felt like the right undergraduate degree for me. And I knew one thing, or I thought I did, when I was set to graduate in the early 2000s. I knew I didn't want to work for those, as I put it naively, evil oil companies or something asinine to that effect. And I was rightly challenged in conversation by one of my aunts, who's the CEO of a publicly traded junior exploration mining firm. And she called me out. She said, Philippe, we're on vacation right now. We flew here. We flew on a plane that was powered by jet fuel. The clothes that you're wearing right now, they were powered by tractors to probably farm cotton. Some like oil and energy is embedded in everything we do. Don't say silly stuff like that. Understand things before you mouth off and go do your homework, because it's not that simple. So I rightly, tail between my legs, thought hard about what she shared. And interestingly, graduating into the recession in 2002, there weren't a lot of opportunities. So I was able to find an opportunity to move over to Europe. I worked as a project engineer based from Edinburgh, Scotland, on oil and gas pipelines in the Middle East and Norway. I learned a bit about upstream, midstream, and downstream. I read excellent books like Daniel Jurgens' The Prize, The History of Money, Oil, and Power. If you want to understand oil and gas and the history, read Jurgens' The Prize. It helped me understand how the world works a bit better. Now, that said, as I returned to Canada, I completed my professional engineering accreditation. I was manufacturing manager for a wire and cable plant. I just saw our systems, the way the world's set up, it's fairly linear. You take things, you use them for a bit. You take things, you make them into things, you use them for a bit, and generally throw them back in a hole in the ground. It just didn't really make sense. I had a close friend who opened my eyes to some great books like Natural Capitalism, Cradle to Cradle, Biomimicry, and it expanded my horizons. And that got me interested, James, in the concept of sustainability. This is about 2005, 2006, 2007. And I discovered a graduate program at the University of Cambridge, a master's of philosophy and engineering for sustainable development that provided, unlike my narrow, deep technical education in engineering, this was introduction to design and systems thinking to understand how to create something that is optimal in both in space and time. Just how do you design with more factors at play? And I threw my name in the hat. It got pulled out, and that was the trigger for shifting my career 6 years in a strong sustainability direction.
Fascinating and diverse career journey. Thanks for sharing. Now you've arrived at JLL. Where are you in your career today, and how does the roadmap look for you moving forward?
I am so happy to land at JLL and with an organization that's so closely aligned with my values and also in its desire and pursuit to shape the future of real estate for a better world. That is the mission of JLL, and it's perfectly aligned with what I personally want to do. JLL is a Fortune 500 company. It's been around for approaching 200 years. It's on the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, it's approaching 100,000 people working in over 80 countries. And in Canada, we have about 1,500 employees. We've been operating in the Canadian market for about 20 years, and I work closely with the CEO of JLL Canada, Alan McKenzie. My role at JLL Canada is to help Alan and the team focus on the right initiatives in the right order so we can deliver on JLL's mission, win market share, create some new business lines, and ideally be recognized as one of the best places to work for progressive real estate professionals in Canada. And I'm just so excited to be on the team and learning alongside everyone. What I think will be happening over the next 5 years is I will be embedding myself to coach and support the team to really understand how we can act upon sustainability in our roles as real estate professionals. I will be working with the global team to advance JLL's sustainability performance. And I will also be working closely with the innovation function to find different organizations who might be particularly progressive with whom to partner, and also where solutions don't exist to problems that we and our customers face, to begin to build new tools that can solve these internal and external problems. So I see a lot of learning and impact at scale happening over the next 5 years, as among other things, JLL works to support its customers to thoughtfully and cost effectively decarbonize their real estate assets and make buildings healthier and more productive for the people who live, work, play, and learn in them, and the communities they serve.
Now, education has been a hot topic on this podcast time and time again, and you've touched upon it a few moments back. I understand you completed your MPhil in engineering for sustainable development at Cambridge. You also hold your Bachelor of Science in Civil and Environmental Engineering from Queen's. How have your studies, both in Canada and Europe, supported the growth of your career?
My undergraduate and master's level studies have taught me to think, to become good problem solvers, to communicate and synthesize, and also write. I really didn't have to write a lot before I did grad school, and boy, did I have to write a lot. Building on that, graduating with a good degree and ideally good marks from a good school, it opens doors, and it's not the be all and end all. I've found, reflecting on my career, beyond opening the doors and teaching me how to think and variously write, most of my learning's been on the job. I've had the good fortune to work with some phenomenal mentors and coaches over the years, both in my industrial part of my career, as well as in my sustainability career. I've had some fantastic teams and mentors like Francisca Quinn, Doug Weber, Peter Halsell, and they've helped me understand things, articulate better. And I hope that those with whom I've had the opportunity to work and coach, I've been able to pass on some of the lessons and approaches that I've found have served me really well.
Now, we talked a lot about what you do know. What are some of the things that you have not figured out, and what would you like to explore and discover in the next chapter of your career?
Beyond the let's say, James, the academic, and there's still much more to learn from a research and applied research standpoint. If I really consider the scope of opportunity for positive impact, I find the two things I'd really like to figure out are, one, how can I do more and more with my time? That's a constraint that we all work with. How can we make the most positive use of the time that we have here? And also, to that extent, how might I engage in wider and wider circles of influence? So it's not just me having to do the work. How can I lean on the community and crowd and industry and people around us to affect positive change? So what I'd really like to try to figure out, I don't have the answer right now. I would like to try to figure out how to achieve exponential positive influence, and also harness, there's a lot of trends at play that are creating different forms of abundance in the world. We're seeing it with for example, the rapidly falling costs of solar PV. Maybe we could get to an energy abundant future. Like, I would like to figure out how best to harness some of these trends of abundance for positive impact at scale. So it's about being smart with my time, positive influence, and harnessing trends of abundance. And I'm not sure, maybe at some point I should set up a podcast.
Let's now take a step closer to home, literally inside the four walls of your house. You've recently relocated the family from Toronto to Chelsea, Quebec, and you've built a new carbon zero home from the ground up. Tell us about that experience.
All told, it was a phenomenal experience. This is the first time we've built a home. My wife is trained as an architect. I'm the engineer. And even though we both have very good technical background to do this, you never know quite what you're getting into when you're building a house for the first time. We could, if Gillian were on the line with us right now, she would also agree. We've all told had a fantastic experience. The problems we were trying to solve with this home were, one, it was literally from lot selection. It was with the idea that we would be creating a zero carbon home. This was foundational as a design constraint. We were going to build a zero carbon home. We're going to do it with, to the extent we could with money, have the lowest possible kind of upfront carbon, or maybe said differently, embodied carbon in the building. We wanted to prove that a zero carbon home shouldn't be more expensive than other homes in terms of design cost. Part of the way we solved that was to make it the right size. We don't have a lot of wasted space in the house. The floor plate design is very, very efficient. It's essentially a stacked bungalow, 2,000 square feet, a semi-sunken basement that's 1,000 square foot, and 1,000 square foot main floor. By having an efficient design, it really manages your build costs. And then the other thing we sought to do, James, I serve on the advisory committee for Rick Hansen Foundation Accessibility Certification, and one of their VPs, Brad McConnell, has been a phenomenal coach to me. And Brad was helping Gillian and me learn about things that we might do to make this more of a lifetime home as well. So we designed it so it could be accessible at grade if any of us ever had a mobility issue, or family or friends needed to stay with us. So it's accessible at grade, live on one floor. One funny thing I'd never even have thought of were it not for Brad is apparently it can be very useful to have a power plug behind your toilet in case you ever need a sit-stand retrofit on your toilet. So we've actually roughed in the power plug behind your toilet to let us do that if you ever need it. So Andrew, just tip for the listeners today. So those were the constraints. The principles that we used to build this home were very much the passive house principles. So the house is oriented perfectly east-west. It's incredibly insulated. It's very, very airtight. We use triple glazed windows in the right amounts on the right side. So there's more windows on the south side, and there's not very many windows at all in the north side, because you don't get the free energy from the sun coming in on the north side, and you lose a lot of heat out those north windows. You want to maintain most of your glazing on the south and east and west, but not too much because you can overheat. We have to that end, really big overhangs, 4-foot overhangs, so that when the sun is high in the sky and hottest in the summer, those direct rays from the sun hit the overhang and don't come in the windows. But when the sun is lower on the horizon in the winter, we get that free heating from the sun. And then we have an energy recovery ventilation system that brings in fresh air all the time. And it extracts, for example, in the winter, the heat from the stale old air, and it passes it into the incoming fresh air so that we don't need a lot of extra top-up heat. So the sun gives us a lot of our heat. And then we've also got in the concrete slab, literally the concrete slab of the basement is the furnace. We have on-demand hot water corner to quarter there. So what's the result of this? We're 3 months in. Our energy bills are really cheap. The fresh air is excellent. We have amazing natural light. It's neither too hot or cold. And the house is also very, very quiet. The last thing is it's a more resilient home. If the grid in Quebec were to ever go dark, like it did in the ice storm in 1998 when I was in Ottawa, this house would never drop below freezing, even in January, because it's so well insulated and airtight. So unlike, unfortunately, some neighbors, we're never going to have burst pipes due to freezing.
Wow, fantastic. What a great passion project for you and your wife. I'm really curious to know, it sounds top of the market in terms of efficiency. How is it performing in terms of cost saving?
In our case, we benefit from the cheap electricity prices that are in the province of Quebec. So that's certainly a nice tailwind. If we were to compare our house to our neighbors, just this winter, and we're still kind of working the kinks out. This winter, our electricity prices for everything, lighting, heating, plug loads, etc., we're coming in at about $150 a month, total energy bill for the house. And this is for 2,000 square feet. our neighbors in the community, also brand new homes, just not built to the same quality fundamentally. Our neighbors' homes were seeing energy bills from both gas and electricity averaging between $600 to $1,000 a month. So factor 4 higher than we were. And our build cost, James, was at least market competitive. Essentially, for the finished house, it came in at approximately $250 a square foot, including general contractor fees and taxes.
Well, it's certainly safe to say that you built your passion for environmental sustainability, both at work and now also at home. So are there any practical energy saving tips or advice that you would have for our listeners?
I'd certainly be happy to share some practical tips in that regard. And my research at grad school was actually into how we might retrofit the UK housing stock to achieve the UK government's Climate Change Act objectives. So I've dove in deep over the past decade into how we retrofit homes. My wife and I have also been experimenting. We have a heritage income property west of Ottawa. And some of the things that we've done there that are really, really important for everyone to do if they've not been done yet. If you're waiting for LEDs to get any better or whatnot, don't wait anymore. LEDs are phenomenal and the quality of light is there. Get any old bulbs over to LEDs. Next, air tightness, critically important. If we think, James, about your condo where the temperature plummets, the reason why is because it's a leaky building. And there are ways to actually do what's known as a blower door test, where you pressurize and depressurize a home or an apartment to understand how leaky it is. And the things that we can do to make a big difference are make sure the caulking seals around doors and trim of windows are as good as possible. That if you've got a hatch up to, let's say, a cavity loft or whatnot, some insulation up in an attic, make sure that thing is sealed as possible. If it's not, you're going to lose so much heat out of it. Maybe even like literally tape it shut in the wintertime. You might also want to put an insulation wrap. You could buy this from Rona or Renault Depot or Home Depot or Home Hardware on your hot water tank to increase the insulation value on your hot water tank. And if you've got any hot water pipes that are exposed from there that you can access easily, cover them with some insulation foam. These things, air tightness, hot water wrap, making sure doors and trim and everything around windows is as sealed as possible, and LED, great. Then the key thing to think about, sometimes we have major improvements that we need to make to our homes, new furnace or whatnot. With the Supreme Court's decision in March 2021 that a carbon price is constitutional, we can bank personally and professionally on increased carbon prices. That means what's cheap today will not be in 5 to 10 years. And when you're thinking about a furnace or other things, be careful about locking into gas because it's going to get more and more expensive. I'd urge listeners to think seriously about how we might, once you've reduced demand through air tightness and otherwise, consider electrifying buildings. So that would mean going to what are known as heat pump technology, which is fully electric, and then introducing energy recovery ventilation systems. This is the way you can have an electrified house. It can reduce your costs, and in due course, if you're set up for it, you could do it. You could integrate some on-site renewable energy that will help reduce further those electricity bills.
Well, I'll certainly be knocking on your door when the time comes and I'm building my carbon zero home. But let's dive back into the industry now. And what are some of the ways that we could be framing our decisions and our choices as real estate professionals?
I would offer two ideas. One, to approach from a life cycle mindset, and secondly, to value risk correctly. Where we're talking firstly about life cycle approach, this means when we're making decisions about design and construction and funding and mortgage debts, that we're considering the total cost and the total carbon associated with projects. When we shift between different phases of a project, from the design and construction, let's say, of a condo into operational, there's a risk of what's known as a split incentive, um, where maybe it's cheaper for the developer to build something and keep their cost per square foot down, but that basically punts over the fence some operational and carbon costs to the occupants. The same challenge exists, let's say, in different forms of real estate, depending on the way the lease is structured, where the owner, the landlord, might be responsible for the furnace, but the tenant is responsible for the bills, to pay the bills. And there might not be an incentive for a landlord to invest in energy or carbon efficiency, because even if they did, they wouldn't see the benefits back. So we've got to get more creative about how we structure contracts and think about things over time. And then second point is valuing risk correctly. I earlier mentioned that I think we've got some room to improve awareness and knowledge in the appraisal and valuation community. I believe that buildings that are built to higher quality, zero carbon standards are less risky assets. They should be offered debt at a cheaper rate, because the likelihood that a lender is going to get their money back is higher. So it's a more certain bet. And also the appraisal community, there are definitely pockets where there is not an understanding of what they're looking at when they're actually even physically assessing a home or a building. They don't understand why there's no air conditioner. Shouldn't I discount this house? You don't have air conditioning. You don't need air conditioning. Air conditioning is totally unnecessary if you've built a high quality. Just think it's a good quality thermos to keep your liquid hot or cool. It's the same thing with air. So we've got some work to do to get to the next level.
I think you've made some very valid points around how the life cycle of real estate is, and the sustainability decisions that come with that are impacted at all levels and all stages. And certainly everyone has a role to play in this. And you've highlighted some very valid points there. Now, if you were to outline the top 3 challenges that the real estate industry is or should be wrestling with at this time, what would they be, in your opinion?
In my opinion, the top 3 are going to be at the biggest macro level. This is the biggest problem, in my opinion. We have a growing international population where people rightly are aspiring to higher standards of living. How might we harness some of the headwinds and tailwinds associated with scarcity and abundance to help more people have healthy, quality lives akin to, shall we say, the quality of life in historically the Western countries? How do we do that when we face different forms of scarcity, also coupled with these trends of abundance? But more people aspiring to higher qualities, that's the nut. Building off of that, some of the strategies to address it that we haven't solved fully. One is how we create a truly circular economy and move away from take from nature, make it into things, use these things that we've made for a bit and throw them back in a hole in the ground. How do we get out of that linear into a circular system where materials are really valued and there are mechanisms to make sure that we use things over and over and over again? The third point I'd make, after the challenges with global population and higher quality aspirations of living and circular economy, the last bit is how might we retrofit existing building stock and build net zero carbon buildings at scale? There's lots of pockets of excellence. What we haven't cracked is how to do this, including financing and leasing structures and market pull. My opinion, it's going to be the tenants who are going to be demanding higher quality spaces that are going to get the attention of owners of real estate, and they're going to vote with their money at time of lease. My biggest bet is that's where the demand pull is going to start to shift the market. But how do we get more buildings ready at scale? We're not there yet.
Now, this is a section of the podcast where we typically get to know you better. So we sort of take the work hat off and move away from innovation and sustainability and just learn more about you. Let's try and have a 60-second lightning round of questions. My business partner loves the quick fire round. So Richard, this one is for you. So over to you, Philippe. Best ever investment?
Education.
An unusual habit?
Twice daily meditation.
Ideal outside temperature?
14C.
Paper or plastic?
Paper.
Talking or texting?
Talking.
Best place to travel?
Got a soft spot for Newfoundland. Can't wait to get back.
Favorite invention?
The smartphone.
Now, if you had a time machine, what period in time would you go to?
I would like to go 10 years into the future, about 2030. There's so much innovation going on. I can't wait to see what we've solved in the next 10 years.
How many hours of sleep do you need?
About 8.5.
How long do you hold your breath?
I have no idea. Probably 60 seconds or something like that.
Shall we try? Favorite documentary?
Unquestionably, BBC, Their Planet Earth.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that one too. Has anyone told you that you look like anyone famous?
A certain elected leader of Canada.
Naming no names. Bicycle or car?
Bicycle any day.
Who do you admire the most?
My wife. I don't know how she and I are collectively still sane after the past year.
And what's your favorite quote?
Something to the effect of "be the change you want to see in the world," the Gandhi quote.
Very powerful. It has been such a great pleasure sitting with you today. Thank you kindly for being part of this very insightful and educational discussion. And now to the final question, and that is, with all that you've learned over the past 20 years through both education and your professional experiences, if you were to summarize the lessons that you have learned and pay it forward to the next generation of sustainability leaders, what would that message be?
My message would be to recognize that we don't know everything. None of us do. And that things continually change. So to be open to new learning and new evidence. And as a result, be humble, be curious, be positive, be service-minded, and first and foremost, keep learning.
Thank you for listening to People Who Perform, the Real Estate Careers podcast brought to you by Highview Partners, a talent search and recruitment firm focused exclusively on Canadian real estate. If your real estate team is looking to find the best next hire, or if you're ready to make the best next move in your career, then reach out to Highview Partners today. Follow us on LinkedIn and visit us at highviewpartners.ca.